Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Games from Scratch, and today we're talking about the O3DE game engine. Now this is the Open 3D engine. This used to be known as Lumberyard, which in turn used to be CryEngine. Lumberyard gave CryEngine or Crytek a ton of money to license the CryEngine source code. They worked on it internally as Lumberyard for a couple of years. It never really took off massively. It used to make a couple of games. They used it to make a number of canceled titles, the Top Gear game, which was really bad, but also Star Citizen and the incredibly successful New World were created using it. So it has a bit of a mixed track record, but it is a AAA level game engine that was free, and now it is truly free. This is an open source project, and not a fake open source project. This is actually under the Apache license, but you can also use it under MIT, and it is managed by the Linux Foundation. The one really cool thing about this new release, though, is this. There is now an installer, and installing O3DE in the past used to be a gigantic pain in the butt, so that is definitely a nice step forward. It's also built on for extensibility. You've got a number of things like, well, here's Amazon's influence. They still want you to use Twitch services, S3, AWS, etc. But the number of people behind this guy, there's a lot of big companies throwing their support behind O3DE, so it'll be interesting to see where this engine ultimately ends up. But the reason we are talking about it today is because of the first official release back in December the 2nd. So quite a bit going on here. Top level TLDR version. There's now a Linux editor and engine runtime. So if you are a Linux user, that is nice. And I guess that makes a lot of sense because it's the Linux Foundation that administrates this open source project now. There's also a Windows installer, which we will see in action today. And then we're going to take just a quick, briefest hands-on with O3DE. Because quite frankly, I'm going to probably cover this in a little bit more depth at some point in the future. So some definitely nice improvements here. Again, in the back end, they did their own multi-threaded renderer. I believe it was called Atom, which was a new feature that should have been back in the July preview. In this release, we've got quite a bit going on. If you're a Linux user, you can do a native version of the engine using Debian Linux package distributions. On Windows, you have a verified Windows installer. On top of that, we have a number of new tools, such as performance profiling and benchmarking tools, experimental terrain systems, script canvas integration for multiplayer networking systems, SDK for engine customization with platform support for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. And then we've got a number of gems. Gems are basically the plugins or extension systems in O3DE coming from third parties, including Kathera for their AI system, Popcorn Effects for their particle systems. By the way, I did a video on this. It's a really cool system. Also did a video on Cesium. It is a real-world, basically, database, so you can recreate the real world in your game. They released a geospatial 3D tile extension. So some stuff from the communities as well. And as I mentioned earlier on, this is an open source project. It is a legit open source project. So you'll see here, it is under the Apache 2 license, but you may elect to use under the MIT license as well, and contributions are made under both. So this is 100% legit open source, and part of the challenge that they've had is they've actually been having to cut out or replicate functionality that was using third-party commercial stuff, like Fmod for audio. So that is stuff that is still being worked on today. You'll notice the latest release corresponds with what we are getting from the installer. So that is the approach we're going to take today. We are going to go ahead and download O3DE using the installer method. This is definitely a nicer way of doing things. So we're going to do, we'll do the official release as opposed to the nightly build, and we'll bring it down. And the install process looks like this. Now, it's still going to download everything for you, so there's still quite a bit going on behind the scenes. Sure. So I think I just did pure straight out defaults. I think this is going to install it in my O3D folder, but I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to watch and do things. But if you ever installed O3DE or Lumberyard in the past, you'll know it was a lot more complicated than this, and it generally didn't work when you were done. So let's see if this works when we are finished. I will be back when it is complete. All right, here we are. It took about the same amount of time as it took to make an espresso. Granted, I have fast internet, but let's go ahead and launch it and see where we are at. There may be an additional download at some point in the future, but yeah, here we go. So we've got our project. Oh, so it's bringing in old projects. We'll go ahead and create a new project. Create new project. All right, so new project will be called temp project. And of course, I will put that in my temp folder. We'll create a standard project. You can go ahead and configure gems. These are basically extensions and add-ons, other things that you want to go ahead and work with. So for example, if you want white boxing, it's actually enabled by default. You can do so there. I'm not going to actually add any gems. I don't need anything beyond the standard. So I'm going to make a standard project in my temp folder and go ahead and create it. So let's see what this is like. Yep, needs to be rebuilt. Where is temp project? Temp project. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to build the project. Build now. Yes. All right, so you can see it's building. We're looking... Actually, that's a pretty reasonable... That's quite... Oh, okay. We're not back to the flawless world yet, so yeah. Okay, it seems to be a make-related error, so it's not finding find o3dc.make, and it's also picking up Visual Studio 2022 as the compiler, so that might be part of the issues, but there's always this when you're dealing with Lumberyard / O3DE, so give me a second, I'll see if I can figure this out and see how long it takes. Well, the good news is I figured it out. The bad news is it took a while, and I just can't recommend checking out Lumberyard yet. This isn't ready for prime time. This is just insane. Anyways, it was a pretty easy fix. So if you want to get things up and running, what you need to do is download the nightly development build. I went to their Discord server, which, by the way, if you run into problems, I recommend you do. But I searched for O3DE dir, which is one of the CMake parameters. Someone said they switched to the nightly build. I uninstalled, I installed the nightly build, and I got it running. So here we are. Here's my project, and I'm going to just showcase why I give up. So I want to cheer for this. I cheered for Lumberyard. I cheered for O3DE, and I know it's early, and they shouldn't call this a public release. They should. There, version 0. That is accurate. So we're going to run the asset browser. Hopefully it's not going to flake out. By the way, if it ever does flake out, go down here. Make sure that it isn't already running. It's not smart enough to handle 2 instances. It just goes really stupid. I already created a level. I'll go ahead and open it back up, and then I'll showcase some of the issues. So here we are. This is O3DE editor. It's nice and clean. They've streamlined things. You've got, it's entity-based, so I'll come up here. I could go ahead and create an entity like so. You can add components to entities. All kinds of components are defined. Atom is the new renderer, by the way, so let's go ahead and add a new mesh in. There we go. So let's make that mesh. We'll give it an asset. There's some included ones, just simple primitives. We'll just drill down until we find them. All right, so here we go. Assets, objects, primitives. Yeah, a lot of drilling down, but there we go. There is our sphere, no lighting on it. Now, one thing you might notice is we've got commands over here for things like grid snapping. That's cool. That's cool. Where's my grid? And I gotta tell you, that's actually it's a bit of a game breaker because you need that. You need to know where your axes are. And I don't have them, and I have no idea where they are. And I started searching, and I gave up. I'm sick of it. It's kind of funny. My wife came downstairs at lunch while I was doing an uninstall. She's like, "What are you working on?" I said, "Oh, I'm working on a Lumberyard project." And she went, "Oh, don't you ever learn?" And I guess apparently I don't. So anyways, I decided I don't know how to get this grid. I went through every single menu, tried to get the grid to show up. Can't do it. So then I do is I go over here. I said, maybe it's just wrong. So then I went over here and I did a layouts, component entity layout. Don't do that. It crashes. So then I thought, okay, well, you know what? Maybe it's just screwed up. I'm going to go ahead and let's configure the layout. Oh, no, we're not going to configure the layout. What we're going to do is reset the layout. So layouts, restore default. Yep, let's restore the default. Maybe we'll get our grid then, because I don't know. And let's give it a sec. Oh, look, we crashed. And I give up. I give up. You broke me. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'll come back in a few months, see if it's anywhere. All I can say is, unless you are willing to deal with all kinds of pain, and you got no idea my pain tolerance running this channel, I just can't recommend it yet, which is a shame, because O3DE has so much potential. And hey, it's on Linux now. Enjoy that. I don't know if it runs, probably doesn't, but it's available for Linux. It's nice to see they've got the installer. The onboarding is getting easier. It's just, I don't know, maybe it should be a little bit private right now, make it public later. They did a game jam like 3 or 4 months back, and I thought about covering it then, and I ran into, well, actually, I ran into less problems then than I did now, but I ran into enough problems. I'm like, why is this a public release? And I thought that at this point it would be fixed, but moral of the story, it's not ready. It's just not ready, and unless you want to pull your hair out, give it some time. All right, that's it. Talk to you all later. Goodbye.